You're listening to the Archaeology Podcast Network.
You have my sword.
And you have my bow.
And my trowel. Hi, you're listening to episode 30 of And My Trowel, where we look at the fantastic side of archaeology and the archaeological side of fantasy. I'm Ash.
And I'm Tilly.
And this is our second part of our discussion with Jessica Von Dahl.
Hello.
If you haven't joined us for part one, we recommend you go back and have a listen because Tilly managed to somehow get us a bit of a mess. She found a cursed painting. And this painting seems to be tied to someone's soul too, just to make it worse. And it's falling apart. So we've enlisted Jess to help us figure out how and if we can help Gorian Dray out. No, not Dorian Gray, his cousin.
Again,
Gorian.
I just want to point out, it's not my fault. I didn't know it was there. Blame the wizards.
Okay, fine. Anyway, Jess, I was wondering, since Tilly and I are simply shovel bums and lab rats, what is art conservation? Can you tell us a little bit more about this, the process and what it entails?
We sort of covered this in the last episode, but just to summarize again, art conservation preserves, sometimes restores, basically stabilizes museum objects, old objects, so paintings, any sort of three-dimensional object, coffins, whatever.
Textiles, we learned, which is apparently easier than glass and metal.
Well, see, I don't actually like working on textiles, but it is technically easier sometimes, maybe.
I see.
Yeah.
Okay. And what kind of conservation does it? I'm just curious, because you did indeed. You mentioned this in the last episode that textiles and organics are kind of easier. What's the conservation of textiles? Do you have to basically like reknit a section? Or like how do you conserve textiles?
Well, as not a textile conservator myself, but being friends with them.
Sorry, we keep asking you about things that you're not specialized.
Well, it makes me sound really smart. I don't know, but
I mean, you know the answers.
Yeah.
So typically,
you are textiles.
Well, again, it's always dependent on the object. Every object is different. Every piece of clothing is different. So sometimes, yeah, it would be reknitting a little section or adding a little patch or just leaving it. A lot of the time with textiles, you sort of just leave it and hope for the best. Also, with more modern textiles that are made out of synthetic materials, they tend to try to destroy themselves by like creating themselves an acid environment.
Kamikaze textiles.
Exactly. They often get like vinegar disease, so you can actually like smell vinegar coming off of them, but they have created their own acetic acid, basically.
They have agency. Fun. They're objects with agency.
They're independent.
Yeah.
I love how you went to that and I immediately was like, I bet that doesn't taste good on chips.
Probably not. Not recommended.
Well, no.
We started to ask questions of our lovely followers and listeners before we do our recordings, and we managed to get a couple of questions that we wanted to ask you, if that's okay, about art conservation and kind of how it all works and things like that. And actually the questions that we got are quite similar, but I'll still do them as separate questions and maybe you can add the nuances to each one. I don't know. So our first one is from Vesuvius on the APN Discord server, who asks, if you really can't save a piece of art, too far gone, etc., do you try to get everything out of it in terms of, quotes, taking it apart? So destructive testing and sampling. Often you have to be on time for those as well if you want good test results. So what parameters do you use to make that decision?
I think that would sort of depend on if you were talking about a museum object or not, because museums would have to like choose to deaccession an object to sort of get rid of it. And a lot of museums just don't have the staff to deaccession objects. It takes a lot of paperwork. So to just fully destroy an object for testing, let's say, I think it would have to be either like you would have to keep the samples and have those as the object, or deaccession it completely and then send it off to whatever lab. For the most part, I can't really think of anything where you would want to destroy something for testing. I could see that more for like forensics, honestly. But
I think that's it's an archaeological question, isn't it? Because archaeology is destruction and all that. So we do sort of tear it apart. So maybe it's just a bit different for art conservation, conserving,
and
destroying.
and if you could think about like cleaning as destructive, which a lot of conservators do, just removing a layer of dust, you could disturb the surface, which is, destroying it, and it's taking away its lived past. And so then, do you want to clean it? Do you not want to clean it? How far do you want to go?
I mean,
with
that's
that?
what I ask myself
it?
about my house as well these days. Like,
Yeah.
do I want to get rid of that lived layer? I think this is a really moral question that I need to ask myself before I get the Hoover
It's destructive. Don't do it.
Right? This is what I keep saying.
That's an occupation layer. Like, you don't want to get rid of that.
Well, future archaeologists will have no clue what happened in my house if I clean it all the time. My goodness.
Exactly. Exactly. Got to leave something for them.
Yeah, do what the Romans do and just litter everywhere.
Right. I mean, I do have 2 small children. It looks like that's happening in the house, to be fair. Except the litter is like stuffed monkeys. But so our second question is kind of related. So I guess it sort of expands on this a little bit. It's from Sasquatch Leatherworks on Instagram, who asks, what is the hardest item to preserve? And are there times when you just can't save something?
I would go back to talking about objects that are trying to destroy themselves by what they're made out of. That's a lot of modern materials. So I don't work on contemporary art. It is just a nightmare for this reason that a lot of the materials that we've more recently created are not stable. And so they just want to fall to pieces. And so certain types of plastics, synthetic fibers, all of these things just want to fall apart. And there's really not a lot you can do. For some cases, you could freeze them and that will slow the process down. In other cases, so like one of the sort of old examples that's not modern is iron gall ink. And because it has iron in it, obviously the iron can corrode if it's too wet or too acidic, and it inherently becomes acidic.
Wow.
So you can put a like buffering layer around the ink or like mount it on a buffering layer. So like something infused with something basic to counteract the acidity. So like sodium bicarbonate or baking soda. That will kind of slow it down, but it never really quite stops, if that makes sense. So there is just a point at which you just have to let it go. I mean, again, one can try to slow things down to as much as...
Okay. And is that, because I remember, this is showing my ignorance, but I read somewhere that there's like quite a lot of paintings, especially from a particular era, and I can't remember which era it is, that all look very like rustic and browns and sort of mellow colors, but actually they would have been super bright colors. But because the paint has, like you were saying, like the ink or the pigments or whatever have kind of corroded or like done something different over time. And I mean, that's almost like the Greek statues as well, right? Which all the marble statues used to be colored in these ridiculous, like gaudy colors. I say ridiculous, but like just really, really bright colors, which gives such a different perspective. So, I mean, is there ever, when you're preserving it or when you're conserving it as well, do you go with like the latest version, or do you try to go to the original version? Like, do you conserve how it's weathered?
Well, again, always dependent on the object. With like some of those paintings, a lot of that is like varnish that is discolored. So if you remove that top layer of like that sort of quote unquote clear layer on top of oil paintings that is typically there, it will reveal the bright colors underneath. And so a lot of those really satisfying conservation painting videos is removing that like discolored varnish.
That's such a good
so
video.
good.
Yes.
Would love
So
to be a
nice.
painting conservator for that satisfaction. So good.
It was recent, wasn't it, that the Louvre, and I think Anne of Cleves is actually a bit of a theme in this, these 2 episodes, but I'm pretty sure the Louvre recently did the restoration on Anne of Cleves' portrait. And it turned out it was like meant to be, well, it looked very brown background, but when they restored it, it was bright blue.
Oh, that might be the one I was thinking of, then. Because I just remember seeing a video or something. Oh, very
What's
cool.
nice about oil paint is that the pigments used in oil paint, especially traditionally, they're not going to fade in the same way. So like watercolor will fade quite a lot, but a lot of the oil paints just really are very stable, and so they won't do a lot, but that top layer of varnish will just turn sort of brownish yellow. And so that's what gives all the old paintings this like old look.
Right.
So if you want it to stay looking old, then you could leave the varnish. But if you want to reveal like the actual artist intentions when they painted it, then you remove the varnish and replace it with typically a modern varnish that won't discolor like that. Something acrylic based.
See, that's very
usually.
interesting, because I was wondering if you've decided either to do, you know, the kind of keeping it as it was, or as you had seen it. What's the sort of maintenance with that? So if you restore it to its original, do you keep it as its original, the original intent of the painting, or do you let it fade again?
You let it age again.
Yeah, to kind of see
Give
that
future
process.
conservators a job.
Yeah. Job security. Well, it depends on if they use sort of depends. Use modern materials to restore it. Usually, if we're bringing an object back to its original iteration, we call it restoring as opposed to conserving. Conserving, I think of more as making the new bits blend in and keeping it looking old. So, you know, showing that it's lived a life, it's traveled through time and space. It's, you know, it should look old. But with paintings, it's a little more interesting because you can kind of tell the artist's original intentions with a painting. And so taking that old varnish off, putting on a new varnish, hopefully a varnish that won't discolor, then you're sort of maintaining the original as opposed to showing that it's aging. And by using those new materials, it typically won't do that fading, darkening, gross thing that old ones do.
The gross.
The gross fading, the gross varnish.
The grime.
And can you get any research from that process as well? Of
I was just thinking, because we learned all about like I just always remember, you know, you're like, they didn't have this type of purple pigment in this time period, therefore it's a fake. Like people always, you know, talk about that in terms of identifying fake paintings and stuff. So is that also something that conservators do?
Yes. Usually you have to be very specialized to do that. I am not, because it takes a lot of lab equipment that is very expensive. So a lot of the big museums have that kind of equipment or access to labs that have that equipment. They have like the cool sort of like these like basically ray guns that will like test the various elements in this.
Yes.
So you can say like, oh, it's got copper, zinc, and whatever, it must be this pigment. And so, you know, you can get very specific with it. And like even different places on different paintings will have different pigments. And so you can see repairs that way. So if it had been altered at some point, that's how they can like X-ray paintings to see like your like the initial sketch to, you know, one layer and then another layer, you know, when they like cover things and stuff.
Object biography.
How obsessed.
Palimpsest biography. All the keywords. Yeah, that's very, very cool. And I like that you can also see previous repairs and restorations. That's awesome.
Yeah. Oh, and going back to your like the Roman statues and Greek statues that were brightly painted, I was in Bath a few years ago, and they have like a lintel or something that displayed in this room that was originally brightly colored, like bright colors. And so for like a few seconds, it will be what it looks like now, which is just like white marble. And then they have like bright colored lights to show how it was painted. And I think that's a really cool way of not restoring it per se, but like showing the original and integrating modern technology with display.
Well, and it gives such a different perception of, because you think of like the polished marble, the Greek, you know, Roman, whatever, and it's like, oh, the classical, elegant, sophisticated, and then you see it covered in like bright red and blue and green and yellow like things, and it's like, oh wow, okay, like that's very different. Like I mean, it's still beautiful, but it's a very different perception, I would say.
Yeah. Oh, where was it? Either the British Museum or the Boston Museum of Fine Arts. They also have, you know, one of these rooms with all the classic white statues, but then they'll have images next to it of renderings where they've been colored. to like show you what it would have looked
Cool.
like. And it is really
Very cool.
jarring because there's a lot of like coral. I just remember there was a lot of coral in this one statue, and I was like, that's an interesting color choice. Okay.
A lot of pastels.
Yeah.
Very specific color choice. Yeah. No, it's always really fascinating. Which, do you notice that as well when you're like, if you're conserving something that you can see? I mean, you were already saying in the last episode you mentioned with the mummy case that there was a lot of stuff happened to it in the 80s and that, you know, was horrendous, like with styrofoam and things. But do you also see like differences in what's the word, like fashions, I guess, of that time? So they'll like restore it to look more like what they think it should look like, or are people usually pretty good at trying to keep to the original?
Well, it's so dependent on the object. I've seen some really good repairs from like, you know, early 20th century or something. But then there's other ones. There was a ship model. And again, this bright coral came up. They decided to paint the ship bright coral and turquoise. And I was like, that's a choice somebody made, probably in the 80s. It was striking. It was certainly striking. This is not the color that they would have intended for this ship model that was made in like 1670. Like, this is not it, guys. So it's really an interesting like observation on like what every conservator is like and whether they've changed their habits or not. Like if you work in one museum for a long time, you can kind of see a pattern of like how the previous conservators worked on things. And so you'll be like, oh, this is clearly so-and-so's work, or this is so-and-so's work, because you can tell like a certain style. So I'm guessing that I have a certain style. I don't know what it is, but
yeah, they've left their mark on it.
Yeah. Because I mean, basically, because you're changing it. So it's going to be something. And like, you can try to be as precise as possible, but there's always going to be something of you left.
It'd be a nightmare if you messed it up. It was like that painting.
I was just thinking the painting of Jesus.
Yeah.
With the woman.
Oh my God, I love it.
No one will notice. No one will notice.
It literally looks like a thumb.
Like a potato.
Yeah. Oh, wow. Tilly, was that your stomach?
Sorry.
Okay, how about we take a break and order from Hobbit DoorDash?
Oh, yes, please. I skipped to Levins's. Oh, can you order some Lebanese bread?
I think so. Jess, do you want in?
Yes, please.
Okay, guys, we'll be right back. Hello, and welcome back to And My Trowel. Now, we're all fed. We can jump right into it.
Oh, I'm already a bit peckish again, but fine, let's continue. So, Jess, as our expert, what do you think we should do here with this particular situation? Which, just a reminder to everyone, we have this picture, this cursed painting of Gorian Dray, the well-known cousin of Dorian Dray. Gorian Dray. Also, just a bit of background to the listeners. The reason why we did this switch around is because when we were planning the episode, I could not for the life of me say the words Dorian Gray. I kept saying Gorian Dray, and we decided, screw it, it's fate. We're going to keep that in the episode.
Yep. So it is forevermore known as Gorian Dray, the second cousin of Dorian Gray.
So, first question. How do we deal with this painting of Gorian Dray?
Well, I have a follow-up question. Are we assuming that Gorian Dray is still living? Because, I mean, as we are all familiar with Dorian Gray, the painting returned back to Dorian looking pretty and youthful, and Dorian himself died. So then, since this painting is falling apart, do we assume that Gorian is still with us? And therefore, what does he say about it?
I think so. Because he doesn't die, he's sort of immortal.
Yeah.
Right?
So he should just be pretty and leaping around somewhere.
Ben Barnes. It's Ben Barnes. Oh my God.
No. Oh no. What a shame.
No. What do we do?
have to go out looking for Ben Barnes.
But I also have another question. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Should we even like touch this painting since it's connected to a person, a soul?
Especially if he's potentially still alive.
And potentially Ben Barnes.
Right.
Should we even touch it?
Is that the secret of Ben Barnes? Is he's an immortal painting bound man?
Possibly. Yes.
Well, I will say that the painting got into your hands somehow. So I think there has to
True.
be some ability to move it or store it or something until you can decide what to do with it. So I think setting it up in an environment that will keep it sort of happy, temperature, humidity, that would be exceedingly acceptable. And then past that, I would start looking for Gorian and what he's up to. If there's next of kin, if there was a will involved, maybe I don't know. I have no idea what would have happened to Gorian with his painting still being gross. So,
but also,
Yeah.
if the painting is, as you say, so we're going on the assumption that Gorian is still alive because the painting looks so horrible and ravaged. So Gorian must be alive and kicking, living the life of a libertine somewhere. But that means that actually, if we were to try and conserve this painting, that could be extremely detrimental to Gorian, because if we try and make the painting look, or like if we, hang on, let me remind myself of restore, if we restore the painting and do it as close as possible to the original appearance, which is what I just learned this word means from Jess, compared to preserving it, which is preventing or slowing down the deterioration. Like, surely, even in both cases, you'd then be affecting Gorian himself.
right. So,
Yes.
if we were to bring Gorian nearby and say, like, test some sort of adhesive, like, let's say, I don't know if the paint is coming off or, how, like, is the paint, I guess here's the question. Is the surface of the painting gross, or is it just the subject that looks gross? Because if the paint is fine and it's just the subject that looks gross, then it shouldn't need anything anyway. And then
I think it was both.
Okay, so if the paint's coming off, then we could try readhering some of the paint with a sort of neutral adhesive and see if that does anything to Gorian. See if he wants it done.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, who knows? Maybe there's
yeah.
like flakes of maybe his face. He's got dry skin now. I don't know.
Maybe his hair will start falling out or something. Yeah.
Well, yeah,
If
because
we-
it's kind of, he's desiccated almost, isn't he? He's got like
Yeah.
his skin or his oil painting is peeling away. And yeah, so he's festering. Does he want us to touch it?
Maybe
Right.
it's good for him.
Yeah. I mean, I think it would
Which
take some
then-
testing and then a lot of conversation.
Okay, which is an interesting point though as well, because if we talked about this earlier, whether this is actually an object or if it is a person and human remains, and I remember having a lecture about this at some point in uni, talking about, for example, like if you have a pair of earrings made from human hair, is that an object or is that human remains? And like, how do you therefore deal with them accordingly? And I guess the same could be said of this. Like, it's technically soul bound to a person. So, yeah, I mean, for example, Jess, you have worked with, so the sort of philosophy around that is also something really interesting, because they are essentially human. They are human remains. So, I mean, how is that kind of dealt with in terms of sort of ethical considerations?
I think it's sort of culture dependent, and something can be both an object and human remains. Because really, at the end of the day, if we look at, say, human hair or skeletal remains, it's sort of object-y. There isn't really life left in it. I think this painting is a sort of different case with a potentially living soul or partial soul, or I don't know if it's like a kind of Horcrux or something. Bringing back to Harry Potter.
We had to get it in this episode.
Yeah.
But if you think of like the Memento Mori jewelry back in the, what was that, late 19th century, early 20th, with human hair art and baby teeth jewelry. I've seen those recently. Very interesting.
Ooh.
Lovely.
Yeah, you can get baby teeth set into like rings and things.
Huh.
It's an object, and it was meant to, preserve the memory of something or somebody, but it's also, their, earthly remains, as it were. And so if we're talking about something like that, then, maintaining it and preserving it and learning about it is also preserving the memory of the person they were trying to remember. So you're perpetuating that desire that caused its creation. So I think that's really like, what would the deceased have wanted, or what would the deceased's relatives have wanted? And that's how generally I treat human remains. Basically, sometimes I even just talk to them and say, what do you want? What do you need? How can I help you?
What would you do if they talked back to you out of curiosity? What would you do if the mummy sat up and be like, well, actually, I've got this ache in my shoulder, and if you could like redo those joints.
It makes me think of a book series by Vivian Shaw, and it's the Greta Helsing series. And I think I talked about this in the vampire episode.
Yeah.
But I think in the second and the third book, she has to treat mummies that have like reanimated and like reawoken for some reason, but like little bones have fallen out or, you know, degraded or something. So she's like starting to like 3D print new bones for them to like put in these new pieces so that they can wander around and do their thing and live their life.
They do that with like turtles and stuff, right? Like they 3D print new parts of their shell so that they can continue to live and all that kind of thing. That's so cool.
So it's cute in the books because the mummies are like there and they're like, what is happening? I was in a very hot climate and now it's raining. Can you explain this to me? But I think it's really nice of like, oh, well, we'll just, 3D print you something and that will make you feel better. And so I, treat human remains similarly of like, how can I make you feel better in your final resting place, whatever that might be and whatever that might look like.
I suppose, is this Dorian's final resting place, though?
Exactly, because if he's still alive, then that sort of leaves us in a bit of a quandary. So, also, in the Dorian Gray book, the whole point is that Dorian can't take it anymore at the end. Like, he's just so overwhelmed by the curse and everything like that, and so he destroys the picture himself. But presumably, because we've got the painting, Gorian doesn't really care about it that much.
Or you've picked it up somewhere.
Or I've just picked it up somewhere and he's there going, where's my painting? So I guess probably the morally right thing to do would indeed be to find Gorian and A, ask if he actually wants the painting. And then B, see whether he wants it preserved.
Yeah, and how he wants it preserved and what that would do it to him and stuff. Yeah.
Well,
yeah, but like, will it show on his face if we stop, like,
if we start adding things?
If we start adding, will he suddenly have a turtle shell 3D printed, like, on his face? Do you know? Like,
which is that happens. So Terry Pratchett reference.
Oh, here we go.
in The Truth, you have Otto von Schreck, who's the photographer at the Times, which is the newspaper, but he's a vampire. And this is using these old-fashioned cameras with like the extremely bright flashlight. And it's because he's a vampire, every time he's got bright light on him, he bursts into he doesn't burst into flame, but he like bursts into a cloud of dust. So if he takes a particularly bright picture, he'll suddenly like just become a cloud of dust and settle down. And then you have to add a drop of blood to like reanimate him. But sometimes, like at one point, he's brushed up into a dustpan because they have to go and find the blood. And then they put a bit of blood on, and then he's got like the pattern of the carpet on his trousers because they've got a bit of the trouser carpet dust in there with him as well. Anyway, that's not really related, but I had to get a Terry Pratchett reference in somewhere.
Obviously. Exactly.
But also, like you were talking before about the fact that, all the different ways of how to let an object age, like continue to age after it's been conserved, because that's the thing. Technically, even if he says, okay, yeah, fine, go ahead, preserve it, restore it, whatever. Well, not restore it maybe, but like preserve it. Like we could say, okay, we won't restore it because that might like make him degrade more, but we could preserve it. But then that will also mean that it doesn't continue to age. So does that mean he will then start to age? But like at a normal rate?
I mean, I understood the cursed painting bit as, the more bad things he does, the more it shows on the painting. And so it's not really dependent on its environment. It's dependent on him. And so we could say like, come on, dude, clean it up. Let's go. Like, be a
And
better
you'd be a
person.
nice guy.
I mean, based
Yeah,
on
like-
this painting. Ooh.
Right. So then it's like,
He
oh
is
man,
a
do we want to
naughty,
meet
naughty
this
boy.
guy?
Yeah,
Okay.
that's maybe we'll send out one of the interns to go and meet this guy.
Well,
Yeah.
maybe what we could do as a kind of, a gesture of kindness, and the fact that somehow we have his painting, is the frame connected to the painting, because the frame is extremely dilapidated and it's crumbling and splintered and stuff. So we
True.
could replace his frame. Does that change the interpretation of the painting or anything like that from an art conservation perspective?
Typically, no. I was actually just talking with a colleague today about frames and how nobody cares about frames as long as they look nice. So,
Well,
I
Okay,
would
well,
say that-
so yeah.
I'm guessing that the frame is not related to the magic tying his soul to the painting. I could be entirely wrong,
Okay.
but I would imagine.
All right.
And then just,
Okay, so we
I mean, if you're going to keep it in a dark room because no one wants to look at it, then, having the frame fall apart is really not the end of the world. Because, again, not very many people care about frames.
Yeah. There you go. Well, we can then, in a gesture of goodwill, we can at least conserve the frame, maybe? Do you think that's
Yeah.
something you'd be able to help us with?
Oh, yes, definitely.
Excellent.
Okay, I think that's pretty good. So
That sounds good to me.
what we're going to do is we're going to try and track down Gorian.
Yeah.
Probably, I don't know, find his last known address. Maybe there's something on the back of the painting.
Yeah, we can have a look.
We're going to have a look. I'm sure the wizards might know. But they probably put it there in the first place, to be
Yeah.
honest.
Yeah.
And
There must
then,
be some
so
sort
we're
of
gonna-
tracking spell.
I was about to say,
good
maybe it's got a
idea,
tracking
yeah.
spell on it, yeah.
Hopefully they don't do a reverse curse spell, because then that's the end of Gorian. Yeah, so we'll do that. And then we'll talk to him about what he wants to do with the painting.
Yeah.
If he
sounds
doesn't
good.
want it, we could always try and keep it in a nice area, hidden away,
Mm.
in a good temperature.
And we can try and
potentially.
research it at least, do the research side of things, because that shouldn't affect the actual painting.
Yeah.
We could get a little bibliography for the
yeah,
object.
life
Where it's been.
biography.
I feel like this could be a book with Dot. We
Right.
could actually publish a book about his life.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oscar oiled.
So,
Not Oscar Wilde.
Good pen name.
oh goodness me, Oscar Wilde. So before we go, Jess, do you have anything you'd like to share with our listeners? Perhaps you've got some exciting projects that are coming up, or any future plans.
I'm currently just keeping an eye out for new opportunities. So if anybody has anything to conserve, let me know. And then there's a Korean Cultural Heritage Conservation Workshop in Korea next year that I was accepted to. Very exciting.
Ooh,
So I'm looking forward to that.
Very cool.
that's very exciting.
Oh, very nice.
Yes.
Well, thank you so much for coming to talk to us yet again. If you'd like to hear more from Jess, either about art conservation or about her work as a forensic anthropologist and archaeologist looking at teeth, you can listen into our vampires episode, which is episodes 17 and 18. So do join us for that. And shameless self-plug, if you want to listen to more from Jess talking about mummies specifically, you can also listen to episode 23 of Tea Break Time Travel, which is another show on the Archaeology Podcast Network, happens to be hosted by myself. So
Are you promoting another show within
What?
a show?
me? No. Hey, we're a
Whoa,
network. We got to
okay.
support each other. Especially if we are me.
And I'm on it. I feel important.
Yeah, that's true. I'll listen to it just for
Hi,
you,
guys.
Jess.
This
just
is
for you.
exciting.
It is called the 1999 Classic featuring Brendan Fraser. So, I mean, the title itself is enough to listen to. But that is about it for this episode of Am I Trial. We hope that you enjoyed this quest. Thank you so much, Jess, for helping out with this particular problem. It was really great to have you join us, and we've definitely learned a lot about yet another of your specializations.
Thanks for having me. I love getting pulled into these adventures with you too.
We'll think of another one. We'll get you
Yeah,
involved
what's your
somehow. in a
other
new one.
specialism?
knitting.
Knitting?
She's
I've
really
got
good at
knitting.
knitting. Yeah.
Yeah.
We'll do knitting.
Okay.
we'll be in touch. Anyway, in the meantime, we are always looking out for new episode ideas. So as always, if you have any new suggestions, do get in contact via email or social media. All contact info can be found in the show notes. And don't forget to follow all of the other amazing shows that are part of the Archaeology Podcast Network. And if you want to support us even further and help to let us continue to make amazing free content for everyone, you can support us by becoming a member. So check out the APN website for more information on that.
Ooh, Tilly. What's that?
What's what?
That thing glinting behind those dusty books. It looks so shiny, so magical.
No, Ash, no, stop it. Don't touch it. We don't know what it is. Not yet, at least.
This episode was produced by Chris Webster from his RV traveling the United States, Tristan Boyle in Scotland, DigTech LLC, Culturo Media, and the Archaeology Podcast Network, and was edited by Rachel Roden.
This has been a presentation of the Archaeology Podcast Network. Visit us on the web for show notes and other podcasts at www.archpodnet.com. Contact us at chris@archaeologypodcastnetwork.com.